I must say, the atmosphere tonight
Everyone in the restaurant
is
thought it was just another perfect evening.
Truly.
He was dining with his fiancée, a private table, champagne, the whole world at his feet. Then the waitress leaned in and whispered 3 words. By the time she walked away, his life would never be the same. Here's what happened next. The chandeliers in the dining room burned like small suns, scattering warm light across velvet chairs and white linen, while the air smelled of butter, citrus, and a promise of something perfect. Daniel Hale sat straight in his chair, a man used to cameras and boardrooms, holding a thin flute of champagne that threw tiny gold beads to the surface with a sigh. He was 52, silver at the temples, famous for reading markets like weather and steering storms like a captain born at sea. Across from him sat Grace, elegant and sure, her dress a soft river of blue that made every eye turn and every whisper bloom like flowers behind napkins. They were engaged for 6 months, and tonight was meant to be a quiet celebration before the public announcement, a small moment of peace before they built a life with schedules carved from marble. A waitress moved toward them with the calm of someone who had trained her steps to disappear, the way good service vanishes into the gold of the room. Her name tag read Maya, and she had eyes the color of wet stone and a steady breath like someone keeping a promise only she could hear. She set down the oysters and the second bottle, then leaned toward Daniel with a small bow, and the room slowed around her like a curtain pulled across a stage. Her mouth came near his ear, and Daniel felt his heart tap once. As if a bird had landed there by mistake, she whispered 3 words. I'm your daughter. For a second, Daniel did not move, and the champagne in his glass held still as if it had turned to glass itself. Grace's smile thinned, then vanished, the way a flame can vanish when a window opens to winter air. Maya eased back, hands folded at her waist, eyes steady, and Daniel heard the clink of a fork somewhere across the room and understood that the world outside his skin had continued to move without his permission. He set the flute down, mouth dry, and said the first useless thing that came to mind, the word people choose when language will not obey. What? He said, and even that small word seemed too heavy for his throat. I'm your daughter, Maya said again, quiet and steady, as if she had practiced the sentence alone in an empty room until it could no longer hurt her. Grace looked from Daniel to Maya, then back to the ring on her hand, and Daniel saw her fingers move as if the ring had turned cold. Around them the night held, and the chandeliers hummed like bees, and somewhere a couple laughed, not knowing their joy had become the border of another person's grief. Daniel felt his chest tighten the way it had the day his father died, the way it had when the bank failed in the city where he was still young enough to believe numbers could not break. He swallowed and found his body again, like stepping into a room and realizing all the windows are open to rain. Please, Maya said, eyes flicking toward Grace with respect that made the sentence softer. We don't need to talk here, but I needed you to know I'm real. Then she stepped away with the same calm steps, her hands steady, her tray balanced like a quiet truth. Grace set her napkin on the table the way a judge sets down a verdict. No hurry, no tremor, only the fact of it. How long? She asked, voice low. Have you known? I don't, Daniel said, shaking his head as if to clear fog from a windshield that kept fogging again because the storm was inside the car. He looked after Maya, saw only the glow of the service station by the kitchen doors, and felt the old memory crawl from the dark. Her mother's name came back to him like a wave that had been building for years, gathering weight across an ocean he had tried not to sail. Elena, he thought, the first woman he had truly loved. The one who cleaned his father's offices in the summer of his 22nd year, when he had believed rebellion was a boat and money was the wind. They had been careful and not careful, brave and young, and his father had noticed with the sharp eyes of a man who measured risk like a surgeon measures blood. His father had ended it, not with shouting, but with a conversation that felt like a contract written on his bones. Daniel had been sent away to Europe to learn the business, and the company made sure Elena had other opportunities, which was the family word for removal and silence. He had tried to find her once, and had failed, and the shame of that failure had become a room he learned never to enter. Now the door had opened, and there stood Maya, carrying a tray, carrying a life, carrying a sentence that undid the knot he had called himself. Grace watched his face and saw the truth there before he spoke, because love can read a face like a map, even when the lines shift. "We should go," she said, and the words were not unkind, only orderly, the way a nurse might speak in a room where someone has fallen. Daniel nodded, signed the check with a hand that remembered how to sign even when his mind could not form the letters of his name, and stood. Cameras did not flash, but phones did lift in that quiet way people pretend is not happening, and the air filled with the soft clicking of futures being captured. They walked to the lobby, where the fountain whispered the peace of water over stone, and the doorman opened the tall brass door like a promise he had kept 1,000 times. The city night pressed close, full of taxi horns and late lights and the invisible river of talk that runs through streets after dinner. In the car, Grace said nothing for a full minute, and Daniel could feel her silence like a seatbelt pulled too tight. Finally, she spoke, eyes on the windshield. "If she is your daughter," Grace said, "we will do the right thing." "The right thing may hurt me," she added softer, "but we will still do it." Daniel nodded. The word "thank you" caught behind his teeth like a branch caught on a stone by the river. At home, the apartment looked like a museum of his best choices. Clean lines, quiet art, everything shining, but not too much. Grace went to the bedroom and closed the door without anger, and Daniel stood in the living room holding his phone like a compass that had lost the north. He called the restaurant and asked to speak with Maya, but she was on the floor and could not come to the phone, so he left his number with a voice that sounded like it belonged to a man he had once met at a funeral. He did not sleep, and when the gray of morning came, it carried with it the dull ache that always follows a night of wakefulness where the mind runs a race without a finish line. At 7 a.m., his phone buzzed with a message that read, "Meet me at the pier at 10. Maya." He wrote back, "I'll be there," and then went to the bedroom where Grace sat on the edge of the bed with a suitcase open beside her like a mouth. "I need time," she said, and he heard no accusation, only a gentle insistence on breathing. "I will not run away from your past, but I will not stand in the middle of it while you learn who you are." "I understand," Daniel said, and he did, because understanding sometimes comes as quiet as the moment after thunder. She kissed his cheek, closed the suitcase, and left without breaking the ring of silence that followed her like a ribbon. The pier was a line of wood and gulls and the smell of salt and engine oil, and Daniel stood there in a navy coat that made him look the way newspapers like to draw him. Maya arrived in a gray sweater and black jeans, no makeup, hair pulled back, her face clear in the kind of light that makes the sky honest. She stood an arm's length away and nodded, and Daniel felt the urge to apologize for everything from the weather to the shape of his life. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, and the words were not enough, but they were the right size for the moment. Maya looked at the water, at the boats shouldering each other like old friends, then back at him. "My mother's name was Elena," she said, and Daniel closed his eyes a second because some names are doors. "She told me you were kind, then gone, and that someone made sure you stayed gone." "She did not hate you," Maya added, as if mercy were a small bird she had kept alive in winter by warming it in her hands. "She died last year, and I found letters she never sent, and a photo of you with her standing by the service elevator in the old office tower. I took a job at your hotel because I didn't know how else to reach you without breaking your life all at once." Daniel listened and felt the ground of himself tilt, then settle, then tilt again, like a boat finding the rhythm of a new sea. "I should have looked harder," he said, and the sentence felt useless and also true, which is the problem with regret. Maya nodded, not forgiving, not condemning, only marking the sentence as a fact like air and salt in the ache in the middle of things. "I want the truth," she said. "I want to know if I am your daughter, and if I am, I want to know what that means." They agreed to a test, done quietly, handled by a doctor who owed Daniel an old favor that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a promise made on a winter night years ago. For 3 days they waited, and Daniel learned how long hours can be when they are not filled with meetings and numbers in the theater of control. He walked the city without security and bought coffee from a cart where the man knew his name and pretended not to, the way decent people do when kindness must hide. He answered a call from a board member who sounded worried in a way that had less to do with Daniel's soul and more to do with stock price. He told his assistant to clear his calendar and then forgot to eat lunch, which felt like a small rebellion against the schedule that once ruled him. Grace called once and asked if he was all right, and he told her the truth, that he did not know. And she said she would check on him again and then did not, which was also a kind of care. On the third day, the doctor sent a message that said only, "Can you come by?" And Daniel understood that this was the sound of a gavel. Maya sat in the office with him, hands clasped, eyes calm, like someone who had once learned to walk on uneven ground without falling. The doctor looked at them over his glasses with the seriousness of a man speaking in a cathedral. "It's conclusive," he said, and slid the paper across the desk like a small ship carrying a heavy cargo. The word daughter filled the room, then the hallway, then the street, then the space inside Daniel's chest where an old hunger had lived without name. He wanted to cry and felt ashamed that tears had not come at his father's funeral, but had come now, in a quiet office with a stranger bearing witness. Maya put her hand on his arm and did not pull it away when his shoulders shook once, twice, as if some muscle inside him had finally broken free. When he could speak, he said, "I am sorry," and the words came out shaped like prayer. Maya looked at him with a kind patience that reminded him of Elena and of the woman he had promised to marry and of the version of himself he hoped to meet one day. "I did not come for your money," she said. "I came for the truth and a chance to know if I belong to anything that will not leave when someone powerful says so." Daniel nodded and understood that belonging was the currency he had been too poor to spend, even while rich enough to buy almost anything else. He asked if he could tell Grace, and Maya said yes, because secrets of this size are too heavy to carry alone without bending the back into a question mark. The story did not stay quiet. Someone at the restaurant had filmed the moment when Maya leaned in, and though the words were not heard, the internet heard them anyway. Because the internet always knows how to replace silence with something louder. Headlines arrived at his door like rude guests, and the board turned his private life into a risk assessment, which is the way boards prey. Grace returned his ring with tears in her eyes and said it was not because of Maya, but because of the man who had allowed others to decide his past for him. "I need to love a man who chooses," she said, and left him with a hope that did not die but did learn to sleep. Daniel called a press conference because he had learned that silence can be louder than a lie. He said on camera that he had a daughter he was proud to claim, and that he had failed her mother when he was young and afraid, and that fear was no longer going to run the house. The stock fell for a week and then rose because fear also runs markets until boredom takes the wheel. The board asked him to step down for a year, and he agreed, because stepping down can be a way of stepping toward. He set up a fund in Elena's name for women who worked invisible jobs. Jobs that made rooms shine and machines run, yet left no names on walls. Maya kept working for a time, then quit because strangers had learned her face, and she did not want to live in a world where every shift felt like an interview. Daniel asked her to lunch once a week with no cameras and no gifts except time, and sometimes they ate in a small diner, where the waitress called everyone honey and brought pie without being asked. They spoke about little things first because big things must learn to walk. He learned she liked old movies where people apologized and meant it, and she learned he liked to cook and was bad at it, which made him human. They visited Elena's grave together on a day when the sky was the color of a quiet mind, and they each left a yellow flower that did not match but still looked right. Weeks passed, and sometimes Daniel thought of calling Grace and did not, because love can be brave, but should not be selfish. He put his apartment on the market and rented a smaller place near the park because he needed to live in rooms with fewer echoes. He walked more and drove less and learned the names of the men who sold newspapers, though papers were thinning like hair in old photographs. He found the address of Elena's sister and brought groceries without a camera. And when the aunt asked why, he said, "Because I am late," which was the best sentence he had learned all year. He taught Maya to sail on a quiet lake far from reporters, and she taught him how to hold his phone without checking the news, which is also a kind of sailing. One evening, months after the whisper, Daniel cooked dinner in his smaller kitchen and felt a calm he did not recognize at first. Maya arrived with a stack of letters and a ribbon, and they sat at the small table, and the room smelled of basil and the good kind of burn from garlic. "These were in Mom's box," she said. "They are the letters she wrote and never sent." They read them slowly, and Elena's voice crossed years like a bridge made of paper and hope. In one letter, Elena wrote about a night by the service elevator where Daniel had promised to be brave and then had not been. And Daniel felt the old shame, but did not drown in it because someone was holding his hand in the present. In another, she wrote that if she ever had a child, she would hope for eyes like the sea at night, because the sea at night admits fear and still moves. Maya smiled and touched her own face as if checking the map there. Daniel said he was sorry again, and Maya said she knew, and that knowing was a beginning, not an end. They ate the pasta and laughed at his overcooked garlic bread, and the laughter softened the room the way music softens a hall before a speech. Later, Grace called and asked to meet for coffee, and Daniel stood by the window with the phone at his ear and felt both dread and relief, which often travel together like twins. They met at a small place near a church where bells marked the hour like a kind hand on a shoulder. Grace looked different in a way he could not name, lighter and also more certain, like someone who has put down a heavy suitcase she had carried so long she forgot its weight. "I watched your press conference," she said. "I saw a man I might love if he keeps choosing the truth when it is not easy." Daniel told her about Maya and the letters in the small apartment and the lake and the market where the man pretended not to know his name. Grace listened and then asked to meet Maya when Maya was ready, and Daniel said thank you in a voice that came from lower in his chest than usual. They did not promise anything, which felt like honesty, and they did not say goodbye forever, which felt like hope. On his way home, Daniel passed the old office tower where he had learned to make money for money's sake. And he looked up at the service elevator and imagined a young woman with a brave smile and a paper cup of tea. He said out loud, "I remember." And then he kept walking, because the past should be honored, but not lived in like a museum where no one touches the glass. Months turned into a year, and Daniel did not return to the company because he had found a different kind of work. He ran the fund, visited schools, and learned the names of cleaners and cooks and doormen who had kept his life running while he thought he was the engine. Grace and Maya met for dinner without him and spoke like two people who cared more about the truth than about winning a side. They told stories about him that made fun of his serious face when he cooks, and Maya told Grace how he nearly fell out of the small boat laughing at a joke about gulls and CEOs. Daniel did not mind being the subject because love makes room where pride used to sit with its elbows out. On the anniversary of The Whisper, the three of them returned to the restaurant, not for drama, not for attention, but because places can carry pain until you teach them a different song. They sat beneath the same chandeliers, ordered the same champagne, and when the waitress came, a different woman with kind eyes, Maya smiled and ordered oysters for the table. They raised their glasses and Daniel said, "To the truth that hurts and heals." Grace added, "To the people brave enough to speak it." Maya finished, "To the nights that change everything and still leave room for morning." The room did not clap, the cameras did not flash, and yet something in Daniel's chest clicked into place. A small gear that had been grinding for years now turning smooth. He looked at Maya and saw not an interruption, but a path. He looked at Grace and saw not a test, but a choice they could make each day without a script. He looked at the chandeliers and thought how light can either blind or bless, depending on whether you are hiding or seen. He chose to be seen. After dinner, they walked into the soft night, and the city felt like a song that had learned a second verse. They passed the fountain in the lobby, and Daniel tossed in a coin not for luck, but as a receipt for a wish already granted. On the sidewalk, a young couple argued quietly about rent and dreams, and Daniel wanted to tell them that choices are small doors that open to rooms you cannot yet see. But he kept the advice to himself and instead smiled at the way they held hands even while disagreeing. Grace squeezed his arm and said, "You're quiet," and he said, "I'm learning," which was the truest thing he knew how to say. Maya walked a step ahead and turned back with a grin that looked a little like Elena and a lot like her own. For another year, life stayed ordinary and good in the new way that follows storms, and ordinary felt like a gift wrapped in plain paper. Daniel learned to be a father by asking questions and listening to answers, even when the answers came as silence that needed time. He learned to be a partner by not pretending he had no scars, and Grace learned to trust the man who brought his whole self to the table instead of a polished mask. He learned to be a citizen by showing up where there were no cameras and staying after others left. He learned that power is useful for building doors when others only see walls. On a quiet Sunday, Daniel found an old box in storage with photos his father had kept, and there was one of Elena in the background of a company picnic, her smile caught mid-laugh, as if the camera had been surprised to find joy near the edge of the frame. He brought the photo to Maya, and they placed it on a shelf beside the letters, and the room felt more complete, like a chord that finally found its third note. Grace looked at the picture and whispered, "Thank you for being brave," and Daniel realized the sentence could be for any of them, or for all of them at once. They made tea and sat in the living room with the window open to the sound of late birds and distant traffic, a city breathing around their small island of peace. The night was calm, and no one needed to whisper anything to change it, because truth had already done its work. A year after that, Daniel received an invitation to return as chair of the company, and he said no with the smile of a man who has finally learned the taste of enough. He accepted a smaller advisory role that left room for mornings at the lake and afternoons at the fund and dinners, where laughter set the table first. On the anniversary of Elena's birthday, Maya and Daniel planted a tree in a small park by the water, and the hole in the ground looked like all the holes people carry inside them until love fills them with roots. They named the tree Hope because hope is the one thing you can plant in public without fear of theft. As seasons turned, the tree grew, and birds found it, and strangers sat in its shade without knowing who planted it or why, which is the right way for gifts to work. Sometimes Daniel would stand near the tree and listen to the city and think of the 3 words that began his second life. He would think of the waitress who was not a stranger, the fiancée who asked for truth, and the mother who had carried love like a lantern through a dark building long ago. He would hold all of it with both hands and not let go, not because he feared it would leave, but because he had learned how to keep what matters. Then he would turn toward home, toward dinner, toward voices he knew, and the city would feel like a promise kept. If you were sitting at that table and heard those 3 words, would you choose to protect your image or protect the truth? And which choice do you believe builds the kind of life that lasts? Share your answer in the comments, and if this story moved you, subscribe to Emotional Stories for more heartfelt tales that start with a whisper and end with a choice that changes everything.